just talked to the Liberty Institute, and we felt pretty good about what they were saying about the Supreme Court. All 9 justices stood up for religious liberty. Do you have comfort on that?
No, I don't.
Okay.
Any more than I have comfort on the fact that after the Hobby Lobby decision, where the court came out emphatically and said you have a right to conscience, that court after court after court said, well, that's for abortifacients. You don't have a right for conscience for marriage. So I've watched as we've had very emphatic rulings from the court, and lower courts just refuse to do anything with it, and below that, lower officials do the same thing. I mean, we have 8-0 ruling by the U.S. Supreme Court that you can have all sorts of religious activities in schools, and yet we have principals across the nation saying, wait a minute, kid, you can't say God at graduation, etc. So I don't have much confidence in that, but there's really a fundamental question that I think has to be asked at some point, and it deals with the nature of judiciary itself. And that is, at what point are we going to go back to say, we have to allow elected officials to make policy rather than the courts? Because for the last 5 sessions, we watched the court increasingly make grander and more bold statements on what they should do. And reading Kennedy's decision this morning, I felt like I was listening to a televangelist at 2 o'clock in the morning somewhere. I mean, that kind of rhetorical language, that kind of apologetic language is pretty unbelievable coming out of a court. And so at some point, we're going to have to get back to fundamental decisions of, okay, the Constitution doesn't allow judges to do this, so what are we going to do as a result? And that's a whole different discussion. But I'm not that secure on religious liberties, and I think you'll see that through the NDOs and through the things that are going to happen at city level, that there's not going to be much protection for religious liberty.
Okay, so I'm back to completely depressed. David, what do we do now? What do you recommend that the average person does this weekend?
Well, at some point, and it's what you've already been talking about, at some point you got to have standalone courage and stand up and say, you know what, the rest of the world may be going off the cliff, but I'm not. And let me tell you, this is a wrong decision, and this is why. And at this point, if we just get in the boat and decide to float with the current, we're going to be done on this. This, to me, is very much like what happened with the fugitive slave law in the 1850s, where that you had one side that says, hey, the courts ruled, this is done deal. Congress has spoken on this, and other people said no. They may have spoken, but they said the wrong thing. And it really started turning things back in the right direction. But that, you get the Dred Scott decision and everything else that goes with it. Yeah, the court ruled, but they ruled in a bad direction for the country and a bad direction for the Constitution. I really did appreciate what Roberts said. He said, if you want to celebrate gay marriage, do it, but don't celebrate the Constitution, because the Constitution had nothing to do with this ruling today. And at some point, I think we're at where we were with Dred Scott, where we say, the Constitution had nothing to do with this ruling. This was judicial activism, and we're going to have to get back at some point to living by a document that we swear to uphold. So I think that's what we do right now, is we start raising our voice and saying, that may be the court, but I'm not going over the cliff with everybody else. I'm not going to get in this rowboat and go over the Niagara Falls. I'm not going to float that direction. I'm going to swim upstream. And I think we'll find quickly that we're not as upstream as we think we are.
Governor Walker just announced that he is adding to his platform now that one of his main things is that he will pass a marriages between a man and a woman amendment to the Constitution. That's what he will push for as President of the United States. Do you think that's wise? What do you think of that, politically speaking?
Politically, it's not going to happen, because you're going to have 2/3 of the Senate go with it. And there's no way you're going to get 25% of Democrats to join 100% of Republicans. So politically, that's a dead issue. It will not go anywhere. Constitutional amendment, the only thing that will make a constitutional amendment go, I had a congressman in Congress years ago who told me something 25 years ago. He said, Congress only sees the light when it feels the heat. And unless Democrats so feel the heat from black pastors and Hispanics and others that are so much more pro-marriage than even whites are, unless they feel that kind of heat, there is no chance of a constitutional amendment going, nor is there a chance that you would get 3/4 of the states to ratify it. I think we can pretty quickly name 13 states that would refuse to ratify, and that would keep it from becoming policy. So that's a great piece of rhetoric. But policy-wise, we're back to how long do we want 9 unelected people to have a majority vote to tell 330 million people what their policies will be.
If you can't get it done, and, the case you laid out pretty convincingly, David, suggests he can't, I don't think it is a great piece of rhetoric, because I think that's going to hurt him with the electorate.
But maybe not in the primary.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to hurt him as much as we think, because what will happen, I mean, we're seeing polling right now, and you would never recognize right now that 81% of the nation says that the issue of gay marriage should not be allowed to infringe on the rights of conscience. Now, that's what 81% believe, but we've got dozens, if not hundreds, of accounts across the nation where by public policy we're doing that. And what happens is people are not being told about rights of conscience, they're being told about equality, and everybody should have the right to love who they want to, and marriage is something that's great, but unless you...
That's where France went wrong.
That's right. And unless it depends on how you frame the rhetoric. And so I think that people have a sense of, I prefer traditional marriage, but I think everybody should have the right to do what they want to do. And so in that sense, I don't think that what Walker does is going to hurt him, particularly with a primary vote where he's struggling with, a dozen other guys to come out with the position. I don't think it'll hurt him much. I think if someone turns his rhetoric into an anti-equality position, then it hurts him. But just to say it the way he said it, I don't think it's going to hurt him politically.
David, thank you very much. Could you just give me a little quick hit on how you think this is affected by 828 and what we're planning on doing there?
Well, 828 is, essentially it's coming back to the individual. And where we are today is one of the frustrations that Americans have is we look at the court and say, I wish they would have done it different, but there's nothing I can do. Great, that's fine. But the American Revolution was not won because we watched George Washington. It was won because people in their local communities said, I'll defend my town. I'll stand up against the British when they come here. I'll be Naphtali Daggett out on the hillside, one man taking on 2,500 British in the Battle of New Haven. I'll be that guy on the hillside that'll take on 2,500. And that's what 828 is going to be. It's time for us to have the force of convictions and stand up in our local areas, talk in our own families, talk in our own churches, talk in our own communities, talk to our own school boards, and start letting our voice be heard at a level where it will be heard. And I think that's one of the great things that has to happen, and that's always been the movement in America that's turned America back in the right direction, is when the grassroots starts bubbling up from the bottom, not coming down from the top at the Supreme Court.
David, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Bless you guys.
Bless you too. David Barton, president of Wall Builders, and we should call him Dr. Barton. He has his PhD, I think, in history and education, and too many people just dismiss him as just some guy who just thinks he knows history. No. He has his doctorate in education, and he's a brilliant man.